Often we talk about precarity as that systemic issue, and that is so important. However, sometimes the voices of those who are living through it are not actually represented. We're not capturing their experiences in the ways that we should. So particularly during COVID, but I think at all times, ECRs are really dealing with multiple sources of uncertainty around their research and the impact on their own research programs and agendas, their contracts, their finances, what this means for their career progression, essentially. My name is Rebecca Wilson. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. However, before starting at McGill, I worked for 3 years as a lecturer at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. My own field of research is in information science, and my area of specialization within that, one of my research areas has been looking into the experiences of early career researchers. In terms of how precarity has impacted me, I think I have less of a direct impact in my own professional life than potentially many of you. However, I do think that we all feel the effects of precarity. Thinking about those who are taking parental leave, maternity, paternity, etc., a lot of them are not sure about whether their contracts are going to be extended, what benefits they're entitled to, how it's going to impact their careers. Are they going to come back to something? Will their project be put on hold, or is that it? They just don't get to do their project. And this, of course, does have an impact that some people are seriously considering leaving academia. I feel it in my field, in my department, my university. And then, of course, I need to be thinking about how it has had an impact on the ways that I will be taking on PhD students and thinking about future research assistants, etc. There is really, I think, a pressure for all of us in academia to take on as many PhD students as possible. When we hire research assistants, to hire them in very quick and easy ways, which means that we all feel the impacts of precarity, and we're all having to deal with them on an ongoing basis. Sort of in terms of my first thoughts, it automatically goes to neoliberal policies and the workings of those who are involved in higher education, because I think that precarity is a systemic issue. I don't think that we can look at just sort of one particular group who is ultimately responsible. I think all of us involved in higher education have some responsibility, and that's to greater or less extent. But I do think, obviously, governments, funders, university administration, senior academic staff, those who have cut funding, increased the number of PhD students, changed work contracts, as well as, and I think all of us in some ways are implicated in this, about how we have allowed higher education to change and to sort of normalize these things. And this is a really thorny issue, especially because of the way that academia works, where so many of us work in isolation, even if we're in departments, but we often work in isolation. And I think that this is what allows precarity to flourish. And we're not talking enough about it until, I think, recently, where we've done a much better job of really starting to point at the issues behind this. I think there are lots of things that could be done to make dealing with precarity better. Obviously, longer contracts. However, I know that we can't just automatically go in and change everyone's contracts. But I think there are ways, and I know that some universities have attempted to do this, of taking the sort of the soft funding that's available and sort of pooling it and giving people longer contracts, 2 and 3 years, where they're not necessarily tied to one particular project, or if they're teaching, hired for one particular class, but that they are sort of that we know that we're going to need people who have their skills, and so they get these longer contracts and then are given jobs within that. So thinking about things like bridging funding between contracts, more fellowships where there's sort of that less tied to that one particular contract. I think that that's really important. I think that we also absolutely need to be thinking about visa considerations for international researchers and academics, that their sort of need to have constant work without any gaps makes it very unsustainable for them to be staying in anywhere that they are, and having to deal with the constant, more contracts, and constantly looking for more work. I also think that we absolutely need to be thinking about resources at the university and department level. So many people, when they start a new position, they don't tend to receive the same sort of benefits that people who are working on continuing contracts receive. So they aren't getting induction. Their general needs aren't being taken into consideration as much in terms of things like computers and office space. That often we rely on PIs or department chairs or heads of school to give all of the help and information they might possibly need. And this, of course, becomes problematic if PIs or heads of school are not necessarily up to date on everything that needs to happen. And I think that establishing or working with ECR groups to deal with some of these things, to advocate and push for some of these things, including maybe getting involved when in that sort of support role, offering resources. I think that those things are all really important. I think we need to think about the practical hands-on things as well as some of those bigger picture like contracts and visas. I think there's also significant issues with isolation. That reliance on PIs and departments for the day-to-day needs, this makes sense, but so many people, that's sort of their whole world, and they're not necessarily connected in the same way because of the precarity of their situation. They're not connected in the same way to other people in departments or faculties or across the university. And they're often excluded from working, some of the workings of departments and universities. They're not included in meetings, or they're excluded from university communications. They're not on that listserv that they should be. And often there's this sort of lack of information about how to do one's job. That said, almost everyone I have talked to talks about how lucky they are to have a job and to do the job that they love. So there is this tension that people feel between the frustration and the love and the feeling lucky. So those are some of the things that I have discovered in talking directly to people about precarity.